So as you mentioned, we have seen that 4.7% growth figure for the second quarter. Now we're going to find out how the economy performed 3 months later. The two interesting figures to note here is one is the year-on-year number. So how close is China to that around 5%? Perhaps slightly better than expected, Steve. So we saw in those 3 months, China's economy grew about 4.6%. Economists had been polled by Reuters. They were estimating ever so slightly less than that, but it is still smaller than the previous quarter. And what this does suggest is that growth in the world's second largest economy does seem to be decelerating. And of course, we've been talking on the program in recent weeks about the raft of stimulus measures that's been promised by Beijing when it comes to fiscal spending, when it comes to lowering interest rates, as well as when it comes to issuing almost $1 trillion worth of bonds. All of this is about trying to stimulate growth in the world's second largest economy and indeed to encourage people to get out and spend, because consumer sentiment there has been weak after the pandemic. Many had expected a post-pandemic boost, but with the ongoing real estate crisis, concerns about debt in the local government, concerns as well about whether or not exports are going to be doing well in the face of geopolitical tensions, it does all spell a rather dire picture for the world's second largest economy that has had such significant growth over the past few decades. So indeed, as I say, these numbers, 4.6% growth experienced from July to September, slightly better than expected, but still just short of that around 5% growth target that Beijing had pledged earlier this year, Steve.
All right, thanks very much for that, Katie Silva there in our Singapore newsroom. We'll have more analysis and reaction. Number 2 economy. Let's bring in our business reporter, Katie Silva. Katie, help us make sense of what we've just seen.
As you say, Steve, it was slightly less than the quarter previously, but it was slightly more than what many economists had predicted, which was that 4.5% figure. We also heard that the economy grew on quarter about 1%. So it does suggest that whilst growth is slowing, there are potentially some bright sparks within the economy. Now, we must say that according to one analyst we've just been speaking with, he's told us that this does bring into doubt, into quote, serious jeopardy, the prospect of Beijing hitting that around 5% target. We're hearing, speaking of Beijing, I believe we can show you some pictures live now that are from the National Bureau of Statistics briefing coming off the back of those numbers. We've just heard from the deputy head of the Stats Bureau basically saying that China's foreign trade situation this year likely better than expected, but that the foundation for economic recovery is not solid yet, Steve. Yeah,
these numbers are going to be poured over for what they mean and what they can tell us about the world's number 2 economy. You mentioned some bright spots there, Katie. Where are those?
Nice of you to ask, Steve. So industrial output is one part. So we heard, for example, some monthly figures. And in the month of September, industrial output was up about 5.5%, almost an entire percentage point more than expected. Similar story for retail sales. And of course, retail sales have been a really big bugbear of the government in Beijing, trying to encourage people to spend money and to get out there and indeed to try and boost consumer confidence. So we heard there that Golden Week likely did indeed provide that boost to consumer sentiment. Fixed asset investment, that met expectations, but there was negative news when it came to the ongoing real estate sector crisis. So we heard, for example, property investment was down about 10% on year, new construction down around 22%. So that suggests that that crisis that we've been talking about for years on the program in the real estate sector, that does indeed seem to be continuing, and it does echo calls from investors that more stimulus is needed. And of course, Beijing in recent weeks has announced or unveiled a raft of measures designed to encourage people to improve sentiment, spend money. For example, about $1 trillion worth of government bonds being issued, lowering of interest rates, lowering the amount that banks need to hold in relation to the debt on their books, as well as fiscal expenditure. We've heard about, for example, about $28 billion announced. So far, not a lot of detail when it comes to those announcements. We've heard as well from the PBOC earlier today saying that it's encouraging investors to pass some of those stimulus measures and some of those policy moves onto the consumer, Steve.
Yeah, good stuff, Katie. Thanks very much for keeping us up to date with those numbers that came in. Katie Silva there in our Singapore newsroom.